Thought I'd make the title a little bit more fun. I think the original title was a little bit boring, but the future of Gmove. I think I've spanned this thing over like 3 times a day, 4 times a day, and now time to be like going a little tech a little bit. I'll walk through a quick agenda, just glossary, context, problem, solution, architecture, and kind of where we're headed. Starting with glossary, I think we'll start off with a sequencer. I know we've been chatting with Astria, Espresso, a few of these other sequencers. No, we're not a shared sequencer business, but I think we're entering this era where a lot of these layer 2s are coming out with their own shared sequencers. You have Optimism Superchain, you have ZK Sync working on a superchain. Aguilar itself is working with a few shared sequencers. So for Movement's network, we envision a network of high throughput rollups that all want to share state and sync across. The biggest issue with this, when you have thousands of rollups, especially those that are different VMs, is how do you sync state across rollups? Specifically state finality guarantees, which I'll get more into later. But we have M1, which is our decentralized ecosystem network. We have the Movement L2 itself, which is kind of the main bread and butter. A VM as a virtual machine, I don't think I need to explain this, but it is the execution layer where folks deploy apps. If you're using Uniswap, Curve, Aave, any of these things, you're probably on the EVM. And then with this modularity thesis, we've seen a Cambrian explosion of different VMs. We have the Solana VM, we have the Move VM, we have Wasm-based VMs and future VMs coming to market. And we're all here for the experimentation. The Movement SDK is a software kit to execute smart contracts on the layer 2 itself. The Move VM itself is, I'll get more into the kind of history and where it comes from. Fractal is the EVM interpreter, so I think the one thing that we specialize in, I'll go into architecture as well, is we recognize that new tech is pretty cool, but it has to have backwards compatibility. Majority of developers today are Solidity, so the question is, how do you onboard new developers and new apps? I think 2 of the layer 1s, Aptos and Sui, try bringing Move to market, but it's a slow process teaching people languages. Solana took 4 years to kind of kick off, and took some time. The first Solana wallet, if you guys remember, it was pretty poor, and then it took like 2 or 3 years until infrastructure got there. And Move is still in that early nascent stage where infrastructure is still developing, teams are still developing, so it's important to also have even compatibility, which is where Fractal will get into. DA layer, I don't think I need to explain this to you guys. I think Nick White can explain it better than I can. So context, Solidity is the most commonly used smart contract language. Most people have written it, probably hate it. There's over $7.6 billion lost so far. Increases the barriers to entry, but more importantly, this chart. This chart is a loom group and why none of your parents, family, or anyone can trust crypto. There's over 4.5 this year in billions lost in hacker attacks this year. Some of the notable exploits are private key compromises, registry attacks, flash loans, math mistakes. Like 2% of all attacks in crypto are just because you added the wrong number. So it's like if you did 256, if the 256-bit limit and you did 257, congratulations, you lost $50 million. In traditional tech, if you get hacked, like when Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook, you just lose a few files and it's not the end of the world. You get hacked in crypto, you lose your entire user base, and most importantly, trust overnight. Because crypto is so reputation-based, it's extremely important to have security, especially at runtime. So part of the work we're doing at Movement is to really bring the security landscape to the forefront where users, developers can trust the system that we're building, and modularity itself can bring security to the forefront of discussions. So context, for those that aren't familiar, there was a DM program around 6 years ago. Facebook essentially put $1 billion in the blockchain. It was like, we're going to have a Facebook blockchain, essentially USDC or their equivalent, floating from New York to Thailand at the speed of light. So you didn't need to send WhatsApp, you didn't need to send PayPal or Venmo. You could do it within Facebook itself. They had all these partnerships and all this work laid out. SEC is like, nah, you can't do that. Thanks, Gensler. But the language was still really powerful, right? It was a new paradigm of resource-oriented programming. You have formal verification built into runtime. And most importantly, you also have block STM. A lot of the parallelization engines that you know and love today, like Monad, Aptos, Sui, et cetera, are all variants of this original research done at Facebook, which was this optimistic parallelization engine known as block STM. So what Move does is brings the security and speed in one VM, and our mission is to bring it to Ethereum. So can we enable safer smart contracts within Ethereum? Can we bring Move to Ethereum? I think so. And our solution is a Move-based rollup on Ethereum. I won't get too into rollups because I think we've kind of nagged on that a lot. But there's 2 main categories of rollups. You have optimistic rollups, which have fraud proofs and challenge periods. And you have ZK rollups, which are validity proofs. fast but computationally expensive. I think most of the rollups coming to market in the early stages, like Arbitrum Optimism, with optimistic proofs, optimistic rollups, and then you had ZK Sync Scroll bringing ZK rollups to market. And we're kind of in this weird stance because now we have these next-gen rollups coming to market. So you have optimistic, ZK, and next-gen rollups. The question is, what's the right architecture? Is it optimistic and ZK? I would still say we're pretty early on where it's still very computationally expensive to do a ZK move VM or a ZK SVM. If you have to write custom circuits, it's probably a 3-year project. And it's a whole different company, honestly. We barely even solved it for the EVM, so doing it for next-gen VM is rather difficult. I think a good middle ground that we reach is ZK fraud proofs, which kind of blends the kind of mix here, where it's still an optimistic roll technically, but you can use validity proofs in ZK when you're doing challenge periods. So you only use ZK when you need it. And that's kind of where we're getting into and kind of blending it. So for starting, we're going to have an optimistic rollup, but the 6, 7, 10-year endgame is a fully end-to-end ZK rollup. And I think a lot of the ZK researchers agree that the endgame is ZK. We believe in validity proofs. It's a little difficult to get there, but I think we're getting there. And that's also endgame for movement. So the final architecture is a move-based ZK rollup. We say ZK fraud proofs to start off with, and then migrating to a validity proof network eventually. M2 makes most sense because A, you have all the benefits of safe execution environments like Move with the high throughput parallelized environment with Ethereum. It's kind of the best of both worlds where if you built on Aptos and Sui, you might have been pushed off by a lack of liquidity, maybe the vibes. But the two main issues for building apps in these new layer ones is A, acquiring liquidity, and B, acquiring mindshare and user base. For context, I built the first DEX on Aptos. This was August 2022, and it was pretty awful. There's like APT and testnet like DEX token, which meant the DEX was kind of useless, right? No one wants to trade 1.5 assets and doesn't really get anywhere. So that same DEX can deploy on top of Movement. You still get all the benefits of Move, but you have native ETH directly from Ethereum. You have low fees because of Celestia and alternative DAs. So you're able to bring essentially these different parts of the stacks in one combined environment. So you have all the benefits of Aptos and Sui while living on Ethereum with liquidity and security, while also having low fees. So this end game is when we can finally have these layer 2s challenge the throughput and security and speed of layer 1s. And we have a few folks do for the SVM, Move VM, Parallelized EVM, and the next gen is the future for sure. A little bit in the architecture. I'll kind of walk through everything. I know I have 10 minutes, but the Movement SDK is where the main block building happens. The Proof Marketplace is kind of on how we generate fraud proofs and validity proofs eventually on, and how we settle on L1. So the EVM compatibility is kind of the bread and butter because a lot of you guys are like, okay, Move is dead. There's like 5 Move developers, and I argue that's true. It's very difficult to build a new language. Solana was barely able to do it, and they pulled it off. Most other alt programming languages kind of die off. I think there's a cause of 2 issues. A, there's no backwards compatibility. If you're a Solidity developer right now, for most L1s, even if you want to try the ecosystem, it's pretty difficult to do so because you need to learn new language, you need to learn new kind of SDKs, and there's so many programming languages, so why would you do that? And secondly, the kind of go-to-market strategy is relatively difficult because you can't get people to taste the ecosystem. You're pretty much isolating yourself so that you yourself and your 5 devs. So that's why some of the L1s have issues. With Movement, we have full end-to-end EVM compatibility at the bytecode level. We support Solidity smart contracts as well as Move smart contracts, compile them to one bytecode, and settle them on the Move VM. Here's a little bit how the translation process happens. I won't get too into it. You can ask questions if you're interested. But essentially, you take the Solidity script, parse it down to AST, which is an abstract syntax tree. You go to intermediary language called UL, which is more similar to assembly. You map those UL opcodes. So you have like 142 Solidity opcodes. You map those to the 54 Move opcodes, and you deploy them on top of the VM itself. It's similar to like Solang on Solana, but actually useful. And then I think similar to Neon. I don't really know what's up there, but it's completely end-to-end compile SDK level. So it's not a bridge at all. I think Neon's more of a bridge from Solana to the EVM. I'm not too sure. This works at runtime. There's no latency issues. So I would say like 60% of the ecosystem right now is EVM, which is fine. We acknowledge that there's very few Move developers right now. We're going to work our asses off to get more Move mindshare. The goal is 10% by the end of the year. But even if you don't like Move, you can still be in Movement. Let's see, go through this. So decentralized sequencers are pretty hot topic. Some people say centralization sequencers are the end game, and we want to prioritize UX. And some people say decentralized sequencers and shared sequencers are the future because you want interop. I would say the correct answer is both. if you're a gaming role prioritizing high throughput rollups or high throughput capacities, you should choose a centralized sequencer today. If you use a decentralized sequencer, there'll be latencies and trade-offs, and you don't necessarily need a shared sequencer. If you're building a fully on-chain MMO, you don't need to have composability with a yield aggregator. It doesn't make sense. You're focused on user experience. You don't need to take the latency. I think secondly, what's really interesting is there are use cases that need shared sequencing. For example, if you're a yield aggregator rollup, imagine if Yearn launched a rollup. They want people to compose with other assets. Maybe it's the GameFi assets they want to roll in. Maybe it's Orbook assets they want to roll in. And for that, shared sequencers are really important. Commonly, the issue is if you have a bridge, you have to read light clients from each different rollup, which is kind of low, slow, clunky, and bad UX. For the first time, if you have shared sequencers, you can read state directly from the shared sequencer itself. So for us, we have a stack which is execution layer stack. You can use whatever role framework, use whatever DA, and then use the move VM and connect to the shared sequencer. That way you have one unified execution layer and one sequencer to connect. If you don't want to use the shared sequencer, that's fine. We'll still love and embrace you, and you can still be part of the community. But we believe that there's a lot of use cases that demand shared sequencers. So the end game is kind of this both economy where you can choose whatever you want, build whatever. But there's some use cases, and I would say most use cases actually would prefer shared sequencers. And most importantly, we're getting into token economics here. Most L2 tokens are meme coins. They're just governance tokens that have no actual value accrual. What's really interesting is when you decentralize a sequencer, now you have MEV, you have robustness, you have censorship resistance. You have all these principles that we work so hard for. That's not just one AWS node that's running billions and billions of dollars. So I think Starknet just announced today that they're enabling staking. All the rollups will eventually decentralize. Yes, Arbitrum is making billions off this sequencer, but the end game is decentralized sequencers and finally getting value accrual back to tokens. So M1, as it stands right now, is a common BFT Tendermint consensus. No, it's just not another consensus, Cosmos chain we slapped on. What's really interesting is a lot of the shared sequencers are working transaction finality, but that's not the main bottleneck for shared sequencers. It's state finality guarantees. If you're Arbitrum trying to bridge to optimism, how do you ensure that the state is synchronous across different rollups? Right now, there's no real solution to that. There's two main proposer solutions. It was either ZK state proofs, which what Lagrange is working on, or you need economic guarantees to back up the state between rollups. So what gets really interesting here is you can actually make the shared sequencer fundamentally like a staking hub where if you have 4 different rollups all joining one shared sequencer, they can all delegate X amount of stake. So if I'm Arbitrum, I can delegate $1 million worth of Arbitrum to this shared sequencing pool. Optimism can delegate OP $1 million worth, and then you have to be honest about your state finality, otherwise you will get slashed. So that state finality guarantees introduces a new paradigm. It's very, very R&D, I will preface this. It hasn't really been implemented, but it's something that our research team, our head of research worked at Mantle and designed their shared sequencer kind of implementation, but it's something that we're thinking into because if we're ever going to get to this end game where people actually care about shared sequencers, transaction finality is not the main issue, it's state finality guarantees. So how do we get there is the main question for us. So yeah, proof of stake, again, native staking token is what gets me up and going. Like, how do we make L2 tokens actually great again? And staking is the way you enable this. You have, if I'm a validator, I stake the move token or alternative tokens to receive emissions, and then I get transaction fees from multiple rollups. And then I can use that tokens to run more and more nodes. So you actually have L1 principles that can be applied to layer 2 solutions, which solves a lot of the paradigms we're seeing where layer 2 tokens don't really scale and don't really compete with layer 1 tokens. But now I think we're entering this mechanism where we can have creativity, we can have MEV, we can have deep, deep MEV research. Imagine Jito for Arbitrum. That'd be pretty cool, right? So yeah, multi-taking stoking, native DA tokens, etc. I know I have 3 minutes, so let me go into the ZK side. Again, another research article or research part that we're looking into. ZK next gen is pretty difficult to do. I think we benchmarked that it still costs around 4 to 5 cents per transaction using Riskier latest benchmarks, which for us is pretty expensive considering our transaction fees are 1 cent to 2 cents. We're trying to get there. So right now, I don't think ZK is there for like ZK Move or ZK SVM, even though teams have kind of implemented it. There's a team that did it for Halo 2, and it was pretty expensive. But I think Succinct is working on making it more accessible, so we're looking to present research with them, where provers can generate the proof. Right now, we can use Plonky 3 for MoveVM. Right now, Plonky 2 is a past example, but with Succinct, you should be able to do Plonky 3 with field encoding, custom gates, and optimizations. The main thing is having recursive proof generation. But until we get there, ZK fraud proofs are pretty good. Again, most users don't care about validity proofs or how decentralized the proof generation is. They just want great user experience. So ZK fraud proofs and optimistic rollups are good enough for the time period. And then once we get the point where ZK proof generation is cheap, and most importantly, proof verification is cheap, we can get to a point where we can have ZK Move and ZK Next-Gen VMs. And yeah, other components, obviously settling on Ethereum. You have a validating bridge smart contract and full nodes. Let's see what else. So yeah, where we are today and what we're launching testnet in 2 weeks. Public testnet, we had private testnet go live a week ago. Have our core teams building on. Intermediate goal is movement as optimistic rollup, ZK fraud proofs, executions movement SDK, sequencing with our M1 network, data availability with Celestia, and then ZK proof generation with Rushi right now. And we're next having our SDK go live, having the ZK rollup go live. Hopefully we can get to a point where proof generation and verification is down so we can have fast, high throughput rollups with ZK and then shared sequencer. And finally, use cases for infra. I think yesterday we announced the first, or the movement phone. I don't know if it's the first movement native phone, but I think mobile is really where we're getting at, where it's finally use cases for apps. We have high throughput chains, high throughput environments. We have a team based in Kyoto that sold 10,000 phones already. It's called Network HQ, you should check it out. But they can have a fully on-chain, decentralized, deep-in product that's going to pick up a lot of steam in Japan. But yeah, use cases for infra, enabled by high throughput infra, and yeah, getting right there. Thank you.